The next big bad is finally here. High Evolutionary is coming to Marvel Snap, and he is probably the most fun I've had theory crafting for different decks going into day one than I've had in a long time. So we have a lot to talk about because it's not just one card. We have 8 cards to talk about all together because of this big bad. So let's talk High Evolutionary. Welcome on in, folks. For those who do not know, my name is Guest, also known as ItsGuestGaming, and if you like today's content, please do me a huge favor because that algorithm is pesky sometimes. Hit that like and follow button because we have a lot to talk about, not just about this card, but about 6, 7, 8 in total cards that you could be potentially using in every single deck that High Evolutionary is going to be the feature of. So let's talk a little bit about what the card is going to bring to the game and how it's going to affect your deck building on both sides. So here he is, High Evolutionary. He is a 4/4. If you have not gotten the update from the announcement video where he previously was a 4/7, he has been changed and is now a 4/4 at the start of the game. You're going to be able to unlock the potential of your cards that do not have abilities. So because it is the start of the game, you're focusing basically on just the main 7 cards that you see here. So it's not going to affect your demons or any other cards that pop up later like rocks, etc. It is just these 7 in particular. They all have brand new abilities. Now, some of them are more focused towards afflicting negative damage. For example, Wasp, Thing, and Cyclops all are going to put out negative damage on the other side of the battlefield in an on reveal or in a static fashion. That all feeds into Abomination, who costs less and less and less the more of those negative afflictions that there are on the other side of the battlefield. Then you have the only ongoing in Hulk, who could crazy scale high into as high as 620 or even higher. But then there's Misty Knight and Shocker, who have unique abilities featuring the idea of let me reduce some cost, let me use the unspent energy, kind of how we would maximize Sunspot in the past. So you can see each of these cards have some synergies with each other. Sometimes they mix 2 and 3. So we're going to talk about a bunch of different styles of decks because yes, I have 15 different decks of all different play styles, whether you want to use all of these cards, whether you want to use some of these cards, whether you like Cerebro decks, no matter what it is, I may have a deck for you. So hang on, let's go for a journey. First up is Fully Evolved. This is taking all of the cards that the High Evolutionary is going to benefit, throws them all together and complements it with Sunspot, Scorpion, Armor, and Rogue. And I've chosen Rogue over Enchantress because we are trying to stay away from the world of Luke Cage. Luke Cage is going to be one of the most prominent cards as a defensive mechanism for the other side of the battlefield, and you need to be able to be ready to counter that. I like Rogue a little bit better right now versus Enchantress. One, because you don't want to accidentally have some weird combination that could affect your Hulk in some magical version of circumstance, but more so I like Rogue because she's cheaper, which could feed into other mechanics of these cards. As we talked about, there are benefits when you don't use all of your energy every turn. I just think that she's a better fit for this version of the deck, but I'll be open and honest that it's probably not the most ideal way to play the High Evolutionary. We're gonna start taking a look at the pieces of how we can move all of the afflictions together, all of the saving energy together, and how can we maximize that? Energy Saver is the first one that starts to mix and match some of these decks together. And with the decks, the way that it's gonna work is you have a couple of different mechanics to play into. You have the Storm and Jessica Jones mechanic or Storm and Nebula mechanic, but I put both Sunspot and Nebula in here because there is not a lot of energy needed to make some of these bigger cards really shine. Obviously, we know about the special synergy with She-Hulk and energy reduction with Sunspot. So if we feed that together with those cards that benefit from the energy reduction or lack thereof, I should say, for Cyclops, Misty Knight, and Sunspot altogether, excuse me, I think it's a really strong deck because it'll start to say, hey, you could play this as a Storm Jessica Jones lane, or maybe just skip a whole turn and now let's put out She-Hulk and Wasp and Armor all together to protect it on top. Hulk is in here as the final big boom turn 6 play because remember, he's going to be gaining +2 as an ongoing for every turn that you didn't use all of your energy, not for every energy that you did not use. Please understand the difference between the two of those so you don't get confused as to why you didn't get a 626 Hulk. I mean, he's strong, but he's not that strong, so be careful there. The Affliction side of things, though, turns into where you're probably going to see, as we've been talking about also on the Snapback podcast, the rise of Hazmat, because the best card, in my opinion, within all of these newly evolved versions is Abomination, where he can essentially turn into a 0-cost card and 9 power to drop. All you got to do is afflict negative energy to 5 cards on the battlefield on the other side. And that is very doable with a number of different mechanics. Of course, Hazmat hits the entire battlefield, so maybe we can do it a second time with Absorbing Man, because now there's another card that got added at the end of the last turn. Thing is going to be afflicting them. Wasp is going to be afflicting them. Spider-Woman is going to be able to afflict them. And then let's also do that while clogging the other side of the battlefield with debris. I love this deck because Spider-Woman, I'm telling y'all, she's probably one of the most slept on cards in the game. And this deck is featuring the oomph that you get from Spider-Woman, and then what ends up being basically a free Abomination. We can also take that very similar idea and then hone it a little bit further and take advantage of the gap that we are creating between the two sides of the battlefield. This is where Omega Red may actually have a chance to shine once again. So we're throwing in Wong, Omega Red, and Typhoid Mary to help get out as much negative affliction on the other side while creating a gap in one lane to benefit your side. So Omega Red, who's going to put that +4 onto the other 2 lanes as well, ends up becoming an incredibly strong 413. No further onslaughts or anything needed because of all of the negative affliction that you're going to be putting out on that side of the battlefield. This one does lean more towards having Hazmat be a turn 5 focused play to then swing on Typhoid Mary, Abomination, and or Omega Red at that time, depending on what combination that your energy will allow you to do by then. I think that there is a big opportunity here. This is one of the ones I'm going to probably be trying first. The last way I'm going to look at negative affliction is by looking at Thanos and looking at a Thanos Lockjaw deck. We're going to mix together 2 of the big bads and create something that will put out a lot of negative on the other side of the battlefield, this time without the worry of Hazmat and needing to have Luke Cage on your side, because you already have the stones that can move everything around. You have Lockjaw, so you can pop out some of these bigger cards early, like Hulk, Thanos, Spider-Woman, ideally Vision, because then you can just slide him over and put in another stone. There's a lot of card draw that comes from this deck, and with really only having 1 ongoing in Hulk, even if that does pop out early, you're really safe with that Enchantress to counter some of the big other ongoing cards that are out there in the meta, like Darkhawk, Devil Dino, etc. So this is what I'm calling the Rabid Dog. Double Shevolutionary is switching the idea of what you can do with your Moon Girl, She-Hulk, Infinite decks into having a couple of more outs for how you can get more out on those final turns. So I am playing the magic variation because some use it, some don't, because I'd like to take advantage of the Dracula synergy of taking in that extra possibility of what is Infinite going to do. Are you going to drop him on turn 7? Or are you just going to leave him in your hand because you only got to turn 6? So with all of the reduction that's happening from Quinjet, Zabu, and Shocker, I do see a lot of cards being dropped on turns 5 and 6 or on turns 6 and 7, whether you choose to skip or not. And Misty Knight is in here in particular as well, because we're looking to capitalize on those little extra +1s that could end up dropping. And honestly, it's just another big wave card that we can put onto turn 7. Imagine already having Dracula down and then doing Moon Girl into the She-Hulks, into the Misty Knights, into the Shockers on turn 6, and then dropping down even more to put out the High Evolutionary and Armor, etc. on turn 7. There's so much that can drop on this deck that I think it's probably gonna be pretty staple. And maybe we switch out the Infinite for Hulk because we would just want to keep it fun and synergetic. Of course, we needed to have a Sarah Control variant. So this is Control from On High. We're taking Sarah Control. You see some of the staples there. Sarah, Enchantress, Shang-Chi, Scorpion, Killmonger, you see what's happening here. So the only time you're really dropping that Nebula is if you can armor it, and then you have all of your other protection mechanics. Now, because Scorpion is a very common staple, that's why we went with the negative Affliction line. We sacrificed Wasp on this one to have room for Abomination, Thing, and also Shocker again, who I am going to push as such a huge piece here, because when you've got Sarah on top of Shocker, you've got a big reduction on some of these cards. So if you only have your Abomination, which is going to get reduced anyway, and then Sarah reduces on top of that, that means that the highest cost card you're going to have to drop on turn 6 is going to be potentially 2, if not 3, depending on if you have Zabu down or not also. So this is another big wave towards the end and countering everything that they've decided to already put down on turn 5. So I think as a control deck, this is going to be a lot of fun. I also would be foolish to not look at Cerebro. You might not think Cerebro necessarily, but hear me out on this. First off, there's 2 versions that we can probably make work here. I'm using C3 because Wasp, such a staple in C3. Bast can turn everything else in there anyway. Shocker now, with that reduction in energy, brings life back to getting more and more and more cards on turn 6 again. So we can throw him into C3 and have Shocker finally have a home because he's doing something for once. Put in Valk with Bast, and you've got a couple of different ways that if you absolutely needed to drop down the High Evolutionary, you can then turn it into a 3 cost. So that one sacrifice is only going to turn into a big boost later on anyway. So you've got a lot of different outs on how you can make your non-3 power cards going to be 3 power and swing the other side of the battlefield now to benefit your side. So I like C3, but I think the theory crafter side of me got a little geeked out thinking about a destroy C4. This is C4 evolved, and I love the synergetic piece of this is a destroy focused C4. It just kind of feels good, you know, explosion C4, you get the idea. So we're putting in Wasp just because it's always good to afflict, Ant-Man, and Carnage, because Carnage has a couple of different things that it could decide to eat. For example, it could eat the Mysterio, it could even eat the Wasp if you time it right, but as long as Carnage only eats one character, well, then it's going to be a C4 synergy. Mysterio's in here, Cloak is in here, all lower cost options. And I do have the newly dropped Negasonic Teenage Warhead as well for 2 reasons. One, you're going to be able to explode that Sabretooth and turn it into a 0 cost. 2, it's a defense mechanism for the other side of the battlefield, so they cannot necessarily get to your Cerebro if you've dropped it, let's say on turn 4 or turn 5. You can drop the Negasonic Teenage Warhead and defend that ongoing so it does not get rogued or enchantressed. You could substitute it out for Claw. I did have that originally too, but then thinking about what we can do with Sabretooth being eaten by Carnage and just having a couple of different mechanisms there, I thought that was a lot of fun. Plus, of course, High Evolutionary themselves and Sarah to have a big wave towards the end of the match. There's just been a huge amount of amazing cards that have dropped, so why not put them all together? So this is May is Crazy. We're taking Howard the Duck, we're taking Iron Lad. So what is it actually doing? We're pulling out as much as we can, and we're capitalizing on Valkyrie specifically, who people forget will benefit Abomination. So you're setting up a secondary win condition by not just having Scorpion and not just having Thing and not just having Wasp, but Valk specifically reducing a card or 2 on the other side of the battlefield, making your Abomination even cheaper. Could be a huge big green guy double drop if Abomination is 0 and Hulk is 6. That is a big amount of power spread out on the battlefield on the final turn of the game. So we're capitalizing on Howard the Duck by using Jubilee, of course. Iron Lad can double up a couple of these really solid mechanics like from Scorpion, Shocker, Valk herself, and Hulk to get that ongoing towards the end of the match. There's a couple of cool ways that we can really benefit each card to 2 lanes. And granted, you're going to probably commit very heavily on this deck, but if you can run this deck, try it. Next up, I'm going to tell you right now, this is a stretch. Read the deck, okay? It is a bounce deck featuring High Evolutionary. So we've sacrificed a couple of ideas and replaced them with some other ideas. Here's what I mean. So we took out some of the key component cards. We see a lot of Iron Man being played recently in the bounce styles, a lot of Darkhawk with Korg, etc. So what I've done is, obviously you have to play High Evolutionary in here. We're taking a very similar idea to what we've learned from the Molt mechanic of playing bounce up until turn 4 or 5, and then feeding into a big card on turn 6. Now, because there are a lot of cards here that Beast can bounce back to becoming a 0 cost, we're going to end up feeding that Sunspot. We're going to end up feeding that Misty Knight ability. We're going to end up feeding that 0 cost Kitty Pryde, getting more and more out there so that way we can afford to have a big drop on turn 6. So this deck is made with the idea that you're looking to bounce everything back and forth through the first 5 turns and end on Hulk. Your secondary win condition is Kitty Pryde and friends on turn 6. So now you've got 2 outs depending on if you were waved and Sandmaned or not. This recently has become one of my favorite styles of deck to play. The yo-yo deck is what I've called it. It's the combination of Lady Sif and Ghost Rider. Take something big, get rid of it, and then bring it on back. So with the High Evolutionary, there's actually a lot that we can do with that. I do have Iron Lad in this deck. Iron Lad could be replaced with either Captain Marvel or Vision. That's up to you guys if you choose to do so. But if you can keep him in here, if you have him, I recommend highly. Misty Knight is mainly in here because you're gonna have less cards on the battlefield. So because you have less cards due to the fact that Wave, Lady Sif, Jubilee, Ghost Rider, all of these plays are going to be plays that bring one big card out at a time, Misty actually makes it a little bit easier to have more spot focused bonuses going to them because of you not using your energy in full. So I really like the idea of her being in this deck. Of course, Thing ends up being a great 4, what could be essentially a 4/9 depending on where it lands. Iron Lad could copy the Spider-Woman effect, the Hulk effect, etc. The Thing just as well, or could even bring back a card early if you want to ensure that you get a higher power out instead of having the 4/3 Ghost Rider. So the yo-yo deck of getting big cards out using Wave, the Lady Sif Ghost Rider combination, and Jubilee brings out a lot of power and lets Misty Knight kind of just put that little cherry on top. Dara, I know, is out there smiling right now somewhere because I'm doing a Master Mold Ronan deck. And I love Master Mold and Ronan decks. I have been playing them for a long time. I got him the second I could, and I have not looked back in any negative way. So how can we capitalize on that? We're gonna look at Viper and sending not just rocks over to the other side, but also the Wasp. To send over a 1 power on a lane that has already put out -2 power over there, you're just clogging that lane the same way the debris rocks would. So Viper has 2 major targets that it can send to the other side of the battlefield. Then you're clogging their hand with all of those Sentinels from Master Mold. Cosmo's gonna stop all of the on reveals, which you can put that Ronan behind to protect it. And now you have those other reduction pieces. Like I said, with the Wasp, you have it with Cyclops, and of course you have your double mechanic of how to go big on the final turn with Shang-Chi, Abomination, and Ronan if you need to. Of course, the Thing is probably the second best card out of all of the evolved cards from High Evolutionary. I would be amiss to not look at ramping up into that Hulk, who is a really cool card. So maybe we go ahead and wave that out. The same reason we just talked about with Misty Knight having very limited targets, therefore boosting up those big cards is exactly what she needs to work for in a ramping wave deck. So your ideal situation is probably Electro. So you're always 1 up, and then you could play on curve for more power. Thing, Hulk, Odin, Doom, Devil Dino. I mean, you guys have seen a wave ramp deck everywhere on the ladder. This is my take, which is giving us a couple of outs on how to get those big cards out there, right? You have Electro, you have Wave, you have Jubilee. Let's land as many big cards as we possibly can. You have your combos of Dr. Doom into Odin. You have your Devil Dino into Iron Man, or Onslaught into Iron Man, or basically anybody into Iron Man at this point. The Thing going now also with Odin is a huge one, which is why at a lower cost, in case if for some reason you do not get some of these ramp cards, Thing is one that you can trigger twice, and I love that for him in the Wavelutionary deck. And lastly, I'm calling this the Silver Nebula Trap. This is a Silver Surfer inspired Nebula deck that the High Evolutionary can capitalize on. So of course you're going to have Cyclops in there. And how does that actually fit into all of this? Well, Nebula is a great target specifically and is trying to bring in as many people as possible. But the good thing is she's not your win condition. She's a straight up distraction. You're looking to play Punisher and Cyclops into that lane to get that power. Maybe even Groot if you time it just right. It's always risky with Groot, but I liked him better versus Star-Lord in this situation because we have Scorpion to give us a backup plan for Abomination, Thing, and High Evolutionary. You have your Storm and Juggernaut combinations, which is always a great turn 3, turn 4. So you have a couple of different outs on what you could do to get to that final Silver Surfer on 6 play. You play out the Silver Surfer, possibly even with Abomination if you got just a couple of negatives from that Scorpion or from the Thing on turn 4 if you didn't go with the Juggernaut play. There's a lot of lock and load here in the Silver Nebula Trap, and I think it's gonna really catch people off guard. So what does it all mean? To me, High Evolutionary is a very flexible card that to build a deck with some of those synergies being capitalized on, you really need to play at least 2 of the evolved cards in a deck and then build from there. It is not a plug and play big bad. It is its own deck archetype that could be by itself, but as you can see from the 15 different decks here, works really, really well building into existing archetypes also. But if you're willing to pay the 6,000 tokens for it, my question to you that I want to see in the comments is, what are you looking to build? What are the synergies that I missed? And what are the decks that excite you that you could have High Evolutionary go even higher and higher and higher? If you enjoyed today's video, again, I greatly appreciate all of the support down below. Like, comment, subscribe, do all the above. You know the routine. It's a YouTube video. Once again, my name is Guest, also known as ItsGuestGaming. Good luck, everybody. Enjoy High Evolutionary.